legislative candidate forum. Done that brand is new, I guess so. You needed it. Your body's activated. Okay, good. Then I don't need to. He's been paid vacation. Okay.
My name is Tiffany Shermack, and I'm president of the Bloomington PTA Council. That's the Parent-Teacher Student Advisory Council in our school district. It is a group comprised of parent representatives from each of the schools in our district. We meet and we talk about the issues facing our children in the schools and in their community. One of the missions and goals of our organization is to advocate for leadership and legislation that secures adequate protection and an excellent education for all our children. And that's our purpose for being here tonight. So I'd like to thank the legislative candidates for joining us, taking time out of your busy campaign schedules. So thank you. And I'd like to thank our live audience for being here as well. And anyone joining us via the TV or a tape delay, thank you for being here. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator tonight, Karen Cook, and she will take us from there.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit how our process is going to work tonight. This is a candidate forum. We're going to have questions we have questions that were submitted to the candidates beforehand, which will be asked this evening. There are also questions that we have created that they will be asked. And we also have audience participation tonight. So if you are in our audience this evening, please put up your hand and a volunteer will come. You can fill out a card and just raise your hand and they'll come get it from you. We also have cards out in the hall if you need to fill one out there. So how our process works. We are going to have an opening statement from each candidate. That will be 2 minutes long. And then during the question period, you will have 1 minute to respond to the question. Not all questions will be asked to every candidate. Some will be asked to all of you. And then at the end of the evening, you all have the opportunity to have a 2-minute closing statement. So tonight, I'm going to introduce our candidates from House District 49B. We have Mr. Paul Rosenthal. Our other candidate has not arrived tonight, so we will see what happens with that. Our second group for Senate District 49 is Senator Melissa Franzen and Mr. Mike Lehmann. From Senate District 50, we have Senator Melissa Halverson-Wickland is with us tonight. And for House District 50A, we have Representative Linda Slocum is here this evening. And for House District 50B, we have Representative Chad Anderson is with us this evening. And we also have a representative for Mr. Andrew Carlson who could not make it tonight. So without further ado, we're going to start with Representative Rosenthal. If you would read your opening statement.
Well, thank you to the council. I don't have anything to read, but I will certainly give my opening statement, and it's always a pleasure to be here. This is one of my favorite events, and you know, I have 2 young kids in public school, so education means the world to me. It's been a pleasure to represent Bloomington, Edina, Eden Prairie, and Minnetonka in the House. I've sat on the Early Childhood Committee. I was vice chair of that for 2 years. Now I'm on the Higher Ed Committee, so I have a pretty good idea from our youngest learners to our oldest learners how important the engagement is with quality education. And, you know, the earliest we can get to somebody that's at risk, the better we have. I will say that Bloomington, and I always say this and other school districts get mad at me, has probably the best early childhood program in the state, if not the country. And the Pond Center with its wraparound services is just amazing. They also just started something new, I believe, last year with high school kids, where they can go out and intern with companies and get some credit that way. I'm very proud to be endorsed by the Bloomington Teachers Federation. I am a strong advocate for our students, our teachers, and our families. So thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here tonight. And I represent Senate District 49, which is all of Edina, West Bloomington, and portions of Eden Prairie, Minnetonka since 2012. And I've served both on the E12 committee my first 2 years, and my second 2 years in my term, I've served on the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee. So I've seen the entire continuum of education and certainly have done work in that environment. And I focus primarily on early childhood education. I've had the authorship of the Early Childhood Education Scholarships for targeted early childhood education. I've also worked on issues of child care affordability and on home visiting. I also serve on the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate and the Finance Committee. I'm vice chair of that committee. So when we talk about education, we also have to look at it holistically, and I think the work in HHS works really hand in hand with the work that we're seeing being done in our schools. And I'm proud to represent Bloomington School District, where you've done so much innovative work and working with our teachers and our educators here, and I look for ways to learn from you and hopefully be able to represent your voice and learning from this forum of what issues of importance are for the constituents of Bloomington. I also serve in Transportation Public Safety. That's the third committee I've served on for the last 4 years, and certainly that is another issue when it comes to making sure that we're able to access our education resources across our district. I'm happy to be here, looking forward to the conversation, and I also look at it from a perspective of a new mother, as I have a 1-year-old and one on the way, so it's certainly bringing it all home. So thank you for having this forum.
Mr. Mike Lehmann?
Well, thank you to the Bloomington PTSA Council for holding this forum, and Karen Cook for moderating. I've been blessed, and that is to live here all my life in the Twin City area. I grew up in Edina, but I've lived here in Bloomington now for almost 37 years. I've raised 2 sons who attended Bloomington schools, and I have a grandson who is attending a Bloomington school. I believe strongly in education, but before I even get into that, tell you a little about my background besides just living in the community. I am a graduate of the University of Minnesota way back in the 70s, so yes, I'm dating myself. And I was fortunate enough to be part of starting 5 different companies, and for the past 23 years worked for a large wholesaler, international wholesaler here in the Twin Cities area in management and inventory control and financial justifications, etc. I love to see at the back of this room where the friends of the Bloomington School District are, all these businesses and stuff, because between the businesses and the schools themselves, those are 2 important parts that have to work so strongly together for the future of a successful community. Education is very important to me. My wife and I have been not only married for almost 47 years now, but we both have college degrees. Our boys both have college degrees. And I hope my grandson, I mentioned earlier, gets his college degree and perhaps becomes a teacher here in the Bloomington School District. So education is critical to the success of a community, along with all the businesses that are associated with that, because the students are the future for business. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Wickland?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the PTSA Council for hosting this event. I think it's been a great opportunity for us to interact with our constituents and get our views out. And I really appreciate your taking the time to organize this and have us here tonight. As she said, I'm Senator Melissa Halverson Wickland, and I represent Bloomington and Richfield in the state Senate and was elected in 2012. I am pretty much a lifelong Bloomington resident, attended Bloomington Public Schools. I'm a graduate of Bloomington Kennedy, proud graduate, and my husband is as well. Both our kids graduated from Bloomington Public Schools, and I've also had the honor of serving the community on the Bloomington School Board as a member and chair. And so it's a great pleasure for me to come back to events at this location. It was a great experience being on the school board here, and I really appreciate all the work that teachers, staff, and administration do to make this school district what it is, which is a great example in our state. So I am happy to be here tonight. I have been involved in education at the state level in the legislature now. Coming from the school board, I really wanted to serve on the education committees, and I have served on education finance and education policy over the 4 years of my term, as well as serving on the Health and Human Services Policy Committee, and have been able to be a strong advocate for education funding for early childhood, as well as working in the areas of mental health systems, which we need to also work on in this state. So I'm really glad to be here tonight.
Thank you. Representative Slocum?
Good evening. I want to again thank, like everyone else, thank the PTSA for putting on a forum to help educate the voters so the voters make smart choices. I want to particularly thank you two, Karen and Tiffany, for the extra work I know you put in. Having been in your shoes before, I know what you had to do to pull this all off. So I want to thank you. I'm a recently retired, I better say, middle school teacher. I taught 7th and 8th grade for 25 years in Minneapolis. And I taught initially in the mean streets on the north side. I've seen every kind of misbehavior. Every kind. Not about every kind, but every kind. I've also seen kids who have received Wallen scholarships for full rides to college, including books and housing, the whole 9 yards. And I was delighted to see that they had a mentoring program that they're using now, because a lot of kids found college to be difficult. I serve on the Commerce Committee. I serve on the Taxes Committee and K-12 Ed Finance. I was Vice Chair of K-12 Ed Finance when my party was in the majority in the House. I've really learned a lot. Being in the legislature sort of like grad school on steroids. It's really a steep learning curve. And I like to read everything. So my two daughters are both teachers. My one daughter teaches in a middle school, like Mom, and she teaches special ed behavior kids. And my oldest daughter teaches in an intermediate district. Yeah, I have 2 seconds. Holy moly. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Representative Chad Anderson?
Hi, thanks again for having this forum. Just great to get together and hear ideas from everyone. My name is Chad Anderson. I have the privilege of serving Bloomington at the state capitol for District 50B. My family's roots in Bloomington go back to the 1950s, and my grandpa was a Bloomington municipal judge in the 50s before Bloomington even became a city in the 1960s. In fact, my first job was mowing the lawns at his apartments that he built on the corner of 106th and Lyndale, which was the site of an old mink farm. I was born here, raised here, went to both Bloomington Kennedy and Normandale for a little bit. I own and operate a business here, and the home where my wife and my 4 kids is about a mile from the home in which I grew up. The city of Bloomington is part of who I am, and I want to see it continue to be a great place to live, work, and operate a business. But Bloomington that we know of today is a lot different from the 1950s and even than the 1990s. Demographically, we're older, more diverse, and the education challenges that we have are different than we have in the past. But I'm convinced that if we work together and come to a consensus and put our kids, our teachers, and our students first, we can come to a good common sense solution that will move our schools forward and create a better environment for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight, candidate Andrew Carlson could not be with us, so he is going to have a representative, Dan Steerett, is going to read an opening statement for him this evening.
Thank you. My name is Dan Steerett. I've been volunteering with Andrew Carlson's campaign, and I'm here tonight to provide some opening remarks on behalf of Andrew, who is currently who is unable to be here tonight, not because he's watching the Vikings game or preparing to watch the Vikings game, but because he's currently fulfilling his role in the Bloomington City Council that has a required meeting at this same time. Andrew would first like to thank all the parents, teachers, and students for making tonight's forum possible so that Bloomington residents can learn more about the issues facing our public schools. Our public schools have always played a vital role in our community. They provide a safe place to learn so kids can develop the necessary 21st century skills to succeed in life and to become Bloomington's future leaders. As a father with 2 daughters in Bloomington Public Schools, Andrew knows that the opportunity to succeed starts with quality education. As state representative, he will support funding to close the achievement gap and improve education outcomes for all students. He will work to provide access to quality childcare, move forward with universal pre-K education, and address teacher shortages. Andrew also believes that students should be able to get a college degree without taking on a mountain of debt. He will work to make college more affordable by freezing tuition and making it easier for graduates to refinance their loans. Andrew believes our elected officials have a responsibility to support our teachers and professional support staff with the resources and training to succeed, which in turn helps our students to succeed. There is no greater public good than teaching our kids to develop a love for learning. Thank you for allowing me to convey Andrew's remarks tonight. I wish you the best with the rest of tonight's forum. If you would like to talk with Andrew about what I have shared with you tonight or have other questions for him, he can be contacted through his website, andrewcarlsonforstaterep.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. Representative Rosenthal will have to leave in about an hour. He has a personal prior family commitment, so if you suddenly don't see him, it's because he had to go. I also want to point out this lovely television in front of me. This is the timer. We also have Suzanne who's running our timer. For the questions tonight, you have a 1-minute response. So she also will hold up some signs, but once you hit the minute, I might cut you off, or there might be a hook. I'm not sure, but please try and keep your answer as best you can in the 1-minute time limit. Your closing statement is 2 minutes, so you still have a little bit of time to add some things in. So I believe we are ready to go. So we're going to ask the first question. This is going to be for all the candidates, and I think we're going to start with Representative Rosenthal, but I will read the question to everybody. So it is, how can the government effectively partner with parents and families to support student and school success, especially in underserved communities? Representative Rosenthal?
We're starting with the second question.
Well, it's a mix-up.
Okay. This is a very, very important question, and I am wearing glasses for it. Underserved communities and the achievement gap is one of the biggest problems facing our state, and I believe in a few things. I believe that we need to target early ed funds towards those learners. I also believe that we have to look at this issue in a more holistic way, that if kids don't have a safe place to sleep or clothes on their back or food to eat, they are much more likely to fall through the cracks and not come into school ready to learn. In fact, will be a burden on the school district, schools, and so I do think we need to look at everything: housing, clothing, food, and safety for these kids, and get them the resources that they need.
Thank you. Senator Franzen?
Thank you, and I agree with those remarks. I also feel like the targeted piece of funding, there's so many competing interests in the state legislature and different budgets, whether it's education, transportation, health and human services, and we're all competing for similar dollars. Certainly education is a priority for our states, a priority for myself included, and target funding for areas such as early childhood education. I certainly support the notion of preschool, and I've supported the all-day kindergarten as well. I also think we should also look at it holistically, as said, and look at programs like home visiting when we know there's a return on investment, and we know we have to provide resources far beyond a school setting for families to be healthy, not only in the health and human services field, but also in stable housing, stable ways to get to and from work, supporting families, and also supporting full service community schools, which is a notion that's also being talked about in the legislature, and certainly somewhere we can have some headway.
Thank you. Mr. Lehmann?
I hate to always agree, but yes, we have to especially focus on the underserved communities here, and I think the ways we do that is through early childhood education with the targeted scholarships that have been so effective to date, as well as we are also talking about the additional counselors and home visits that might be needed to help serve these underserved students, because if they aren't school ready by the time they're 4 years or 5 years hitting kindergarten, they're behind the rest of their educational career. So we need to really focus on working with the families so that these students are ready to go, and so they can have an effective educational learning experience not only from day one but throughout their school career through their high school days. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Wicklund?
Thank you. Yes, I believe that one thing that we need to do is to have our schools in Bloomington schools be looking at our families. How are they made up? What cultural backgrounds do they come from? How can we understand better what their needs are? They might be different than they were 10, 20 years ago. In ways that we engage them might be different. I think we need to look at the whole family and needs they might have within the community in terms of housing and transportation in order to get to school related events. I think other ways to address engagement. We know that strong relationships between the students, their teachers and staff, and their families will lead to better student outcomes. So having a way for home visits for teachers to engage with their students, I believe is another way that families can be included.
Thank you. Representative Slocum?
I keep moving this microphone back and forth. Well, how can government partner with parents, especially for underserved kids? We've been throwing lots of money at underserved kids, and we haven't really gotten the bang that I think we probably should have expected. So it can't just be money alone. It has to be smart money. And I believe we just funded a couple of years ago the Northside Achievement Zone, and there's a St. Paul accompaniment. And what they have is they have education designed for the child, the kids, which is innovative. I'm not much on factory schools. Put them at a desk, put them in the classroom. I think every kid learns differently, and we need to address that. And boy, is a minute short.
Representative Anderson?
Yeah, obviously the parents and the family support to the well-being of the students in the school are important. As Representative Slocum said, we have had some state funds that have partnered with communities, and we need to maybe revisit those programs to make sure that the money is being spent wisely and those programs are doing what they're supposed to do. And just making sure the parents get involved, asking the teachers. Teachers have a lot of knowledge, and asking the teachers of what they're seeing in the classroom and if there's a way that they know that they can better partner with the parents. But just realizing that the parents are a big part of it too, and getting them involved and getting other businesses to help mentor and tutor to help with those kids as well.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to do a question you haven't seen. So this question is going to be for Senate District 49, Senator Franzen and Mr. Lehmann, and then it's also going to be for House District 49, so that'll be you, Paul Rosenthal. So, the Minnesota Office of the Legislative Auditor is gathering information on mandatory testing in Minnesota schools, which is how well tests are administered, how useful are the results, and how much does standardized testing cost the state, etc. The OLA report will be released in early 2017. So our question is, what are your thoughts on standardized testing?
Thank you for the question. It's a very important one. We certainly want to know and have data available for us to know how good we are doing, whether it's our kids or for any data for that matter when we're trying to figure out where to invest our dollars. There needs to be certain flexibility. I served on E12 my first 2 years, and we had a lot of talk about how different districts are potentially affected differently because of testing and the time needed to prepare for testing. So a lot of districts want flexibility on that, and we also have different layers of testing. But bottom line is we must make sure that we have our testing results that are used to help our students, not to penalize them, and that we also use our results to support teachers. And my notion about testing, it's important. We need to have data to know how good we're doing and where to focus our attention, but it should be something to help us, not to penalize either the teacher or the students.
Okay, thank you.
Standardized testing, I can go two different ways on that. If we get into the No Child Left Behind or the Common Core type testing, that seems to be standardized testing that, to me, lowers the bar for our students. Bloomington has been so blessed with testing over the years and excellent results in its school system that I favor more individual testing based on what the teachers know about the students, so that the students themselves are given adequate testing so that they, in turn, can be given the attention they need when they're challenged in a certain way, or that the teacher can increase, I'll say, motivation when it's a student that's not being challenged enough. Every student learns individually, as we've heard here before, and the teachers are in the best position to understand what that child's needs are. So standardized testing can be a positive, but it's very important that we don't make it the end-all for student achievement. Thank you.
Thank you.
I happen to agree. I think we're teaching to the test, and so instead of letting students learn, and I believe that students learn at different rates and at different times, and we can measure that with teachers and other support staff in the school. So we got to allow kids to go at their own pace. I know that my son, for instance, was behind, and then he just moved forward, and I don't think the standardized testing captures that. And frankly, I think we have too much of it, and we should concentrate more on what the teacher has to give the child than on what the test does. And so I would be in favor of getting rid of a lot of the standardized tests. We need some to see how we're doing overall, but in general, I think we're teaching to the test too much.
Thank you. Well, keeping along that vein, we have a question that's for Senate District 50 and House Districts 50A and B. So here's the question. In the past few years, there has been much debate in the state over teacher performance and test scores. So how would you evaluate teacher quality?
Should I go first?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I just wasn't sure. Well, I think that the system that we've put in place in Minnesota that is a comprehensive teacher evaluation program, I think it's coming close closer to finding a way to make teacher evaluation a productive process, not only for the teachers. They learn about where areas that they're strong and areas that they could improve, as well as finding ways for teachers to share best practices with each other. Bloomington has been really done a model job of implementing the teacher evaluation program, and has coaches who are working with teachers and evaluators that are well-trained, which I think is essential in finding the appropriate way to evaluate teachers.
Okay, teacher quality. Most principals know exactly what's going on in the different classrooms in a building, and most principals know how to make sure that a teacher who's not doing their job goes away, and goes away using due process, so there's not an arbitrary kind of a layoff, but a processed one where the teacher has plenty of time to kick their game up and do what they need to do. I like peer-based evaluations, which is part of, but not wholly, the teacher evaluation process as it stands right now. I think using observations and sharing best practices and team teaching would make teachers grow, as opposed to a punitive system where you're rated and ranked, and I think that's kind of counterproductive. It's like testing.
Yeah, so every kid learns in different manners, in different ways, at different speeds, and I think figuring out the teacher performance based on maybe the movement of the student, of where they are at the beginning of the year and where they are at the end, if they've moved, how much they've moved, and taking into account what the student is and getting the parents involved and making sure that there is some sort of movement. Some are going to move a lot faster than others, and so to do it all at the same time is difficult because every kid will move in a different spot. So I think just individualizing the student performance to how they do, how they move, is what I would do.
Thank you. We had a question submitted that was, it's long. The setup is long. The question is at the end, but this is going to be for all of the candidates. So I'm going to read it. Just stay with me. I'll repeat it if it needs. So, in a recent letter to the editor in the Bloomington Sun-Current regarding contract negotiations, the writer claimed that teachers are not being valued for the work they are doing, as it seems their work greatly exceeds teaching the mandated curriculum. For example, they cannot begin to instruct until they deal with mental health concerns, behavioral issues, cultural and language barriers, and other issues that arise in our rapidly changing globalized society. However, what is not rapidly changing is the bureaucratic system that operates education. Inevitably, districts are allocating ever-decreasing resources to maintain a level of service across the board versus teachers and support staff feeling and being valued for the work they do every day. So what do you see as the role of the legislature in determining how education could be administered as well as funded in order to alleviate these issues? We're going to start with Representative Rosenthal. And you have 1 minute.
Part of the question again, just the first part. Could you read part of the question again?
Yeah, in a recent letter to the editor, so regarding contract negotiations, the writer claimed that teachers are not being valued for the work they are doing, as it seems their work greatly exceeds teaching the mandated curriculum. And then they are dealing with mental health, behavior issues, cultural and languages barriers, and just that's a rapidly changing globalized society. So how does the district's revenue, decreasing revenue versus teachers and staff feeling valued, how do you see the legislature's role in alleviating that stress?
Well, first of all, I think our teachers and our support staff should be valued. They've been demonized for years, which I just don't understand. And in the 2013-14 session, we poured more money onto the formula. Different schools, I guess, used it in different ways. I would like to see our teachers respected, given the resources and the power to know what's going on in their room and know what's going on with the teachers, the children that they teach. So I think we do need more support staff, and they need to be valued too. My wife is an IT para at a elementary school, and the fact that the administration and teachers are at odds puts not only teachers and the administration in a bad spot, it puts families and kids in a bad spot. So I would advocate using more money to support our teachers and our support staff.
Senator Franklin?
Thank you for the question. I also believe our role as a legislature is to assess, prioritize, and support identifying those areas of prioritization for funding, or not necessarily funding, but any policy relief that we can give to make it easier for teachers to spend with their kids and to actually be able to teach versus all the extra administrative work that we pile on to their already demanding schedule. Whether it's counselors that we have to support, we have one of the lowest ratios, or highest ratios, excuse me, 1 per every 792 students in Minnesota, which is a big problem, and we're not going to fix that issue right away in one scoop, but we certainly need to evaluate the mental health needs of our kids and support them with resources, whether it's from our state budget for education or other areas, and health and human services, school-based mental health, and other supports that we can be able to prioritize for funding.
Thank you. Mr. Lehmann?
Well, this isn't unlike what businesses face with increasing rules, regulations, and the main focus of the business gets choked out. They spend too much time on regulation. I empathize with the teachers. They've been trained to teach, and that's what they should be doing at least the majority of the time. Legislative role in all this is simply to fund the teachers and the school districts and then stay out of the way. The results will speak for themselves if we allow the teachers to work with the students and come up with what's most effective for them. And in that regard, we're going to see higher results, better teacher satisfaction, and happier school boards, I might admit, too, because I think they can get real frustrated with some of the regulations that we legislate, which really probably isn't needed in the majority of cases.
Yeah, I think that teachers today are asked to do a lot more than they were asked to do, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think they do need to be observing students for a lot more issues that they might be bringing to the classroom, other things that they're dealing with, students deal with outside the classroom. It will impact their performance. If you're hungry or if your family situation is stressful, that will come with you to school as well and impact your ability to learn. So I think that the state legislature does need to do as much as possible, provide enough funding so that we are adequately supporting not only the teachers but the school district's ability to have support personnel as needed, counselors, mental health programming, or nutritional funding for nutritional programs. I think will also support teachers in their work in the classroom.
Thank you.
Well, I think that, just a quick story. We had a bill to streamline paperwork for special ed teachers because they have mountains of paperwork, mountains and mountains of paperwork. And so they were directed by the legislature to streamline that paperwork. What did they do? They added meetings for special ed teachers to train them on how to go through a computerized paperwork thing. They didn't minimize their paperwork at all. So we're going to be fixing that situation this year. Respectful relationships should be the bottom line, whether it's parents, teachers, students, whoever it is. Respect should be the bottom line. The teachers, I support the teachers. They are in that classroom with the kids, oftentimes longer and spending more time than the parents do. And their input and assessments should be valued and solicited.
First of all, the teachers have to be respected and they have to be excited to go to school and to teach. Everybody should be a little bit excited to go to work, otherwise their performance in whatever job they do. And I would think that teachers would have to be the number one excited job, and if they're not excited, I want my kids to be taught by someone that's excited to go to work, that's worrying about other things in life. Like Representative Slocum said, I did the math the other day, and I think during the day, my kid is at school 7 hours, and he's at home for 4 hours when he's awake. So the teachers have my children a lot more than I do. We need to give the schools more resources, give them the opportunity to allocate those resources, and just make sure we give them the local control, and they can use that for innovation and spend it the way they want to. But yes, teachers need to be respected and need to be excited to go to teach.
Thank you. Okay, so this question is an audience question, and we are going to have our candidates from the 50, so the Senate and the House. This is, do you think year-round school would be beneficial to our students? Why or why not? So we are going to start with Representative Anderson.
He's not a representative, yes. Yes.
Yes, he is.
Oh, you are?
Yes, he is.
Oh, my bad, my bad. I must have been wearing blinders.
Year-round school. I think that education can be year-round and giving kids opportunities to learn different skills throughout the summers. I know my son right now, he's excited when school break happens, and he needs that time to kind of rejuvenate. But maybe little things throughout the summer and having the parents involved, maybe with some sort of suggested things that they can learn throughout the year, so they're not totally starting new at the beginning of the year. But I think my son right now likes the summer off, and so.
Okay,
Representative Slocum.
after I completely blew it over here. Oh, I'm so sorry. Year-round school. No way. Number one, the state can't afford it. And they're not going to be able to afford it for the next number of years because the price is too high to run year-round school. And then you think, what is the purpose? Because kids can learn in the summer. There's all kinds of programs for kids of all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of socioeconomics. And so there's learning that occurs during the summer. The potential for it is there. Kids don't always have to be in a classroom. I think we do our very best with factory schools to take creativity away from kids. And the summer allows kids to breathe and run and make lemonade stands and play and do things that add to their creativity, add to their imagination, and I need to stop.
Senator Wickland.
Well, I think that the idea of year-round school can be implemented with some success, and I think there are opportunities for schools to develop that kind of a schedule if they wish to experiment with it or to implement it. But I think overall, I think it's more it's probably not more effective to look to that as a solution for our immediate needs. And I think that more importantly, we need to look at summer as a time where kids are not all able to have good creative opportunities, and how do we change that so that more kids have the opportunity to be in good situations where they are learning, where they aren't losing what they've learned over the school year, which is an issue. So I think that we can do a better job of structuring summer so that more parents have an opportunity to send their kids to high-quality programs.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to head over to 49, and this is also an audience question. We are going to begin with Mr. Lehmann, and the question is, teacher tenure has advantages and disadvantages. Do you believe that tenure should continue, and why?
I'm going to liken it to business again. Tenure alone can be important. Years of experience are second to none in any profession. However, that's effective experience in those years and effective results. So tenure by itself, I definitely feel that should not be held as the highest measurement for any teacher. It should be by the performance, including the results of the students, and I heard peer review, that's possible also, but the administrators, the principals are in the best position, I think, to help evaluate the teachers in this respect, and the performance and the results and how the students respond to the teacher is more critical than ever in this day and age. So tenure itself, no, definitely not. It should be the effectiveness of the teacher.
Senator Franzen?
Thank you for the question. I believe as well that tenure is important, experience matters. I did work in the private sector, and the higher you go up, it's mainly a lot due to how well you know your job and how you performed in it as well. So I think not only the years of service, but also how well you perform at your job are important aspects. We see that in other industries, such as higher education as well, where we value a professor who's been teaching in academia and has published. So it's a similar setting to in our E12 area. Certainly, different factors have to be considered, and I know districts across our state do consider them as part of their evaluation. So I support the local control for schools to continue to perform that way and do their evaluations, and certainly take into account years of service and how well a teacher is performing, and they then take action with those results.
Thank you. Representative Rosenthal?
I too believe that we need the most experienced and the best teachers for our kids. So tenure alone, I think is fine. There already is some mechanisms in place to remove teachers that are underperforming. So that's a non-issue to me. Peer-to-peer reviews and mentorships and Q-Comp and all the available systems that are out there to make our teachers the best that they can be, I think is a very, very smart way to go. I think that the older teachers have a lot to give to the younger teachers and vice versa. So I think that having the time to spend with a mentor and having all the other options that are available to succeed, as I said, Q-Comp and peer-to-peer review and that sort of thing, I think is a good thing.
Thank you. All right, this question is for all the candidates. We're going to start with Senator Wickland and move this way, and then we'll come back around. So, it is well known that support staff is vital to effective learning. This includes nurses, psychologists, social workers, and chemical health specialists. However, Minnesota ranks near the bottom nationally in counselor-to-student ratio, 1 counselor to every 792 students. What do you feel is necessary to close this gap and provide better services to our students?
Well, I think that statement about how many counselors per student or how many students per counselor we have in Minnesota, I think we think of Minnesota as being a fairly progressive state and taking into account what students need in their buildings, but that is definitely short-sighted in the numbers of counselors that we have. To address this, with counselors, social workers, nurses, others who can help students with other concerns outside the classroom, I think that we need to provide adequate funding in general to the classrooms. I don't think we've caught up with what we should be providing just on a general per pupil formula. So that needs to be there so schools have the ability to add counselor resources. But then we also need to, I think, dedicate specific funding like the School Support Services Act that I was a co-author of that would provide matching grants to schools to hire additional support services staff.
Okay, thank you. Representative Slocum?
Well, support staff, we've limped along with not enough for so many years that we have this dubious position of like almost last in the country for number of support staff people. I think we obviously and clearly need to fund more support staff, particularly in the mental health field, because kids are coming to school with we're more sensitive to children that are different and might have some mental health needs. I don't know that kids have changed over the course of years, but we are more sensitive to it at this point, and it would be good to be able to serve them with support staff. But I believe in local control, because one school may need social workers, one school may need a psychologist on staff, one school may need something else completely, college counselors or whatever. So I think it should be mandated by local people who know what the needs are.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
I think at the state level, we need to give resources to the local school districts and make sure they have what they need to do the job they need to do. We do need to give local control back to the school boards and let the administrators, the teachers, and the involved parents figure out what exactly needs to be done. I don't know at the state level if we want to dictate exactly who needs to be hired, but we need to give the resources so that those local decisions can be made easier.
Thank you. Representative Rosenthal?
You know, as I said before, my wife started out as a kindergarten para, then they cut those, and the support staff is vital, and particularly in mental health. And, you know, we need to take the time with the kids and not throw it into the teacher's lap to address needs that they have. And I'm glad to hear that Representative Anderson wants to fund schools at a higher rate, because they're still being funded, I believe, at a 2003 level. And we need to fix that, and we need the support staff to do it. And I also believe in local control, but local control has to take into consideration the counselors, the mental health, the social workers, and without them, the burden on the teachers is that much greater. And my kids came up to me the other day and he said, "Dad, I want to see my counselor." I said, "When was the last time you saw him?" He said, 8 months ago. And that's not acceptable.
Thank you. Senator Franzen?
Thank you for the question. I think a lot has been said. I would add that we do need to close the gap, but it's also allowing for flexibility, also for innovation and partnership with better alignment with our counties. I know the Bloomington School District is working with our county, Hennepin County, to provide those services and better link services to families, and all districts should be also exploring that option. I'm sure a lot of them are, and allowing teachers to teach first and not to have to focus so much on the area where it's not really their expertise, and certainly we have this gap of counselors, but look for other ways that we can link our county services with better coordination, better partnership, even law enforcement. We can find ways to continue to work on this area with other streams of funding and other supports that we do throughout our state budget.
Mr. Lehmann?
The counselor-to-student ratio that's mentioned here, 1 to 792, I have to say I don't know what the correct ratio should be. This is an area I'd like to learn more from and understand what are the ratios, because I don't think a one-size ratio, fits all, or we improve that depending on the school district. I think we have to tailor it to the individual school district, because everyone has different needs. I mean, Bloomington is certainly different from the inner city and so forth going on down the line. And so here's an area I'd like to talk to the administrators and teachers themselves and find out where we need these these counselors and so forth. I think the special needs students obviously have probably increased the need for these, and so we do need to meet those needs and fund them where they're needed per school district.
Thank you. We are going to ask one more all question. We're going to start with Representative Rosenthal. In the near future, Minnesota will be facing a teacher shortage, particularly in specialized content areas like science, math, vocation, special education, and early learning. In addition to the number of teachers, there is also a lack of diversity among staff in schools. How can the state help districts recruit and retain the best teachers?
It's a good question and a tough question. There's certain things we can do to attract people, I think, and one of the answers might be some loan forgiveness on their debt from college. I think also that in 2017 we did $2 million in, it's slated to be $2 million in loan forgiveness Teachers shortage areas grants, $2.8 million. There's the Collaborative Urban Educator, which is $310,000. But just as an example to get off this a little bit, my sons went to school where they spoke 27 languages at home as a first language, and also mainstream kids with special needs. So we need people that are passionate and willing to go to work, and we also need a bigger diversity in our school buildings.
Thank you. Senator Franzen?
Thank you. I think we need to make it easier in streamlining the licensing process, and affordability is another issue where we need to not only allow folks to come into this great profession and see how their investment's also going to reap, so we need to pay them well as well. But back to the licensing piece, it's interesting, and to be a little provocative, it seems like it might be even easier to have a medical cannabis dispensary than it is to get licensing to teach here in the state. And I'm not trying to be too facetious here, but at the same time, we do need to make it. We have a shortage of teachers. We know that. We have a shortage of diversity, and when we know the problems ahead of us, and we are lacking the action to do so. So I would really urge my colleagues, and I take myself into that commitment, to find a way that we can make it easier to enter the profession, to be attractive to the profession, and to really build up the teaching profession as a profession of honor like it used to be.
Mr. Lehmann?
It's ironic that we're talking about educational issues and we can't seem to encourage more teachers coming into the profession itself, which is such a noble profession. I have a sister that just retired after 30-some years in the teaching profession, 5th grade, and I remember even when we were children, she would be the teacher and I'd be the student. But anyways, so she knew she was going to be a teacher from the time she was young, and I think that's what we have to do, a little bit more evaluation of the students and who might have the potential and abilities to become teachers, and encourage this, what I consider a very honorable, noble profession. A good teacher is worth their weight in gold. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. And so if we can encourage more education throughout, not only in high school to career counseling, but up through college, and encouraging more incentives to become teachers, because it's critical to our future success, not only as a community, but as a business community.
Thank you. Senator Wickland?
Well, I think in terms of retaining teachers in the profession, I think we need to continue to look at how are we paying them? Are we funding the schools in such a way that they're able to provide adequate salaries, and also appropriate class sizes? I think that also we need to look at their work environment. Are we creating an environment where teachers can work collaboratively with their administration and with each other to create the best environment for students to learn? I think in some areas, specifically like special education, we really need to tackle the paperwork and regulations in that area, because that is, it's really upsetting for teachers to spend so much time during the day working with students, but then they have to go home and they have to take paperwork home to work on in the evenings, and that's not fair or conducive to drawing in more people to the profession.
Thank you. Representative Slocum?
Thank you. Loan forgiveness has been mentioned, with college debt being astronomical for most kids coming through college. Loan forgiveness for teachers in certain need areas would be a really good way to attract teachers to a particular field. If you haven't toured Augsburg's Somali teacher pipeline, you should, because it's phenomenal what they do. And again, with wraparound services for the college kids. Hamlin has an urban educators program, which is also pretty amazing for recruiting minority teachers. Streamline some licensure requirements so that people with life experiences and don't have to sit through Education 101. And last, a Grow Your Own program, where high school kids in the Bloomington schools who are interested in teaching as a career can come up and have a little extra push from the Bloomington schools because using classes. time expired.
Thank you. Representative Anderson.
There's currently a legislative study group working on teacher licensure, and look forward to seeing their recommendations to improving the licensing. I think one thing is the alternative pathways to licensure and getting those mid-career professionals to come in and help teach. Let's say a woman has worked at Toro for a while in the accounting department, and making it easy for her to get to be able to teach in the classroom, I think would also help. But I think just, yeah, the alternative pathway to licensure, I think, is a big thing with that, and just making sure that we look at that working group and make sure that they figure out what's best.
Thank you. Well, our table is getting smaller, so I'm no longer separating questions. So this is for all the candidates. We're going to start with Representative Slocum and move this way. So here's the setup for the question, then I'll read the question. So unlike other taxing government bodies in the state, Minnesota school districts are required by law to get approval from voters to renew existing operating referendums. While 99% of school district operating levy renewal questions put to Minnesota voters are approved, districts still have to allocate resources that could be used for education purposes to help pass their levies. So our question is, local control. Do you support allowing school boards to renew an existing operating levy at the same rate and duration without a public vote the same as other Minnesota taxing bodies?
Interesting.
Absolutely. I'm not going to use my full minute. I'm not. I'm so excited. Absolutely. I think city councils can renew operating levies, and school boards are elected boards. If you don't, citizens don't like how the school board voted for whatever reason, get a new school board member. The election occurs, and I think they ought to be able to do what other government bodies can do, which is renew existing referendums. Boom.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
Wow, okay. It's funny, there's a lot of stuff that you learn when you're in the legislature and all the ins and outs, and this is not something that I have studied on. So I think with whatever I do at the state, it's always, there's goods and bads for everything. I think figuring that out and sitting down with school boards and with teachers and parents and with everyone to see what is best and see the cost and see what is done and see how it benefits. I'd like to, sit down and see all those answers. It makes sense if there is fees and costs involved in that, and if it's going to be something that's going to be done or something needed, I see the value in that. But I want to sit down and see exactly what all those numbers were and see the input of everybody before the decision was made.
Okay, thank you. Senator Franzen.
Thank you. I do believe in the notion. I think the issue is full disclosure to the public. I would be okay if the ballot actually explained that this would be something that could be renewed without an additional vote. If that's the case, I would be more comfortable with it, but if it's not, I don't think that the public has the expectation that these levies as they stand or referendum will continue. So full disclosure, and certainly not all local government bodies are created equally. For instance, school boards and school districts can't have a say on a city's TIF district, and I know that that's been a sore subject as well because they are technically affected. But every level of government has its purpose, and there's a rhyme or reason. I would think with full disclosure to the public, I would be more comfortable with it, but certainly without it, I would have problems.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lehmann.
Rather tough question, I think. You're asking to permanently raise taxes, or in effect, is what it comes down to. Legislation, of course, passes sales taxes, income taxes, and of course local governments pass property taxes, and nobody expects those to come down. It just doesn't happen. School referendums are unique in that they're put in for a period of time, usually 10 years, and then they are renewed. Very rarely are they not renewed because they get used and dependent on that funding coming in. So in that regard, I think the taxpayers just need to be informed up front that this is an ongoing thing, and rather than referendums, maybe it's just an increase in the school levy in that regard, and it's a permanent thing going forward, so they can, again, evaluate the money they're spending and see how effective it is, and change that through the school boards going forward if needed.
Thank you. Senator Wickland?
Yes, I would support giving the school boards the authority to make this decision about continuing a levy, not indefinitely, but to continue it for a period of time without having to take it to a vote. In fact, I've co-authored a bill that would have given school boards that authority. I think that within that bill, there is provision for having a public hearing, of course, to get information out, and also a time frame for that type of implementation to go into effect so that an election can occur before that is going to ever happen. So people know that their elected school board members will have that authority similar to the city council members. And so I think those stipulations need to be in place, but I do think that school board members are elected members of the community. They represent their constituents, and they should have that authority.
Thank you. Okay, for this question, we're going to start with Representative Anderson, and we're going to move this way. What is your position on school choice? Would you support the creation of more charter schools or funding public schools to offer more streamlined learning opportunities for students?
I think that all students don't learn in the same manner, the same way, the same speed, and I would support giving the parents the choice to send their kid to the school that they feel best fits them. And I think it's just figuring out where the need is and going from there. But I do support the school choice and putting the parents in charge of their kids to figure out which type of learning best fits them.
Thank you. Representative Slocum?
Well, see, that one for me is a tough. First off, charter schools are public schools, and therefore they're not private schools, they're not separated out, they're public schools, and I think our traditional public schools have changed their makeup, basically. They've branched into specialties, kind of magnet programs, if you will, to attract kids and as an answer to some of the charter schools that specifically, like you may have a drama emphasis or science or technology emphasis, something like that with a charter. In 2009, I chief-authored the Charter School Reform Bill, which is the first time charter schools have been, the law from charter schools, which originated in Minnesota, was actually gone through, and we went through with a fine-tooth comb and made, love them, hate them. It was a wonderful law that made charter schools accountable, more accountable, and there we go. 1 minute up.
Thank you. Senator Wickland?
Having a hard time with that 1 minute thing.
Yeah. It's challenging.
It's hard when you have a lot of candidates.
I support the school choice mechanisms that we have in place today. We have the ability for school districts to create schools that are magnet schools or use themes to I don't know, designate their school as a STEM school. That type of provision is in place. Charter schools are allowed to be developed according to, as Representative Slocum said, according to themes or serving a specific need. And I believe that parents should have the ability to choose which school their children attend, and they have that in Minnesota. We have the very open possibility for parents to select schools in their district, outside their district, as well as charter schools, and I think that that's a sufficient level of choice.
Yes, I fully support school choice. I think it provides a little bit of competition between the schools, and the parents can evaluate, and so the schools become more effective in that regard. Charter schools, of which there are now 168, and about 6% of our public school population attends them, I think are definitely the incubators for innovation. They not only operate on a less expensive budget, but they seem to be getting results. Some of them have more results than others. We've had some very strong successes, and we've had some not so strong successes. But on the whole, they're given the freedom to be creative and specialize in a given area, along with their, what's it called, supporter or administrator or whatever that they have to.
Authorizer.
Authorizer, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. So it really has created a new dynamic, which I think is healthy for our educational system.
Thank you. And I would just add that our Minnesota Constitution basically outlines our mandate to fund public schools. So certainly that is our priority as a state, and we're not doing a great job. We can always improve, but we have been funding education at a higher rate since 2012, since I've been in the legislature, after a history of cutting and shifting budgets to balance our budget on the backs of our schools. So I would say school choice for me is continuing to fund our great public education system. Certainly there are other areas that come into play in higher ed and early childhood, which I strongly support as well. But when it comes to our E12 system, we have to do a better job at funding it as it is today. And teachers and parents have choice right now, whether it's moving to a district, busing, or there's options for charter schools, as has been mentioned, and teacher-governed schools, and many other options that have been created by the legislature. So I think we have ways to go, but certainly support our strong public education system.
Thank you. Well, keeping on in the funding vein, Minnesota has thrived because as a society we value education. Our commitment and dedication to investing in the quality of our schools has earned us recognition as having a world-class education system. In 2003, the state assumed a greater share of public education funding. Between 2003 and 2016, the state funding of public schools has not kept pace with inflation. The underfunding for 2017 is $626 per pupil. So do you support increasing the state's per pupil funding to catch up and be aligned with inflation going forward? And we're going to start with Senator Franzen.
Thank you. And on the inflation aspect, I've never been a fan of that mechanism. I think it's in our authority or our mandate as elected officials to evaluate on a year-by-year biennium when we're putting together our budget where we need to make increases and prioritize the entire state budget, education being a largest part of our state budget. So I'm not a fan of indexing. Certainly see that numbers are stagnant, but like I just mentioned, we have been making some headway in the funding, and we also have other competing interests in transportation and health and human services, mental health. You can go on and on. We are not able to accommodate full funding for any of our state programs, so we need to do a better job prioritizing where is it that we need to focus our efforts in education. We certainly hear from our school districts and our school boards and experts of where we need to make those adjustments, and we have been doing so at least since I've been in office since 2012, but we still have a long ways to go as your question presents. So we haven't kept pace, but I don't believe in indexing is the right answer.
Thank you. Mr. Lehmann?
School funding comes about 70% from the state. The rest is made up from the district and, of course, property taxes. When the state is challenged with funding, yes, it falls behind, but I also know school districts are creative in continuing to fund ways, whether that's through property taxes or other incentives. I'm not always sure, but I know it's there. So to try to catch up may be a fact saying, well, wait a minute, are they going to then give back some of what they've raised locally if they've been able to maintain their level of support? At the same token, the last biennium budget, I believe, increased at 2% each year, which is slightly above inflation. So going forward, I think we have to continue to look at inflation and fund adequately, yes.
Thank you. Senator Wickland?
Yes, I think that we have made progress by increasing the formula the last biennium, and I believe that was a good start, but not sufficient. The costs that school districts face in terms of their transportation costs, their salaries, and also insurance, if we look at health insurance costs rising more quickly than inflation even, I think that what we are currently providing is not sufficient to adequately fund the educational programs that we consider requirements for schools. I think also districts have different capabilities for raising money in their own district, and it puts some districts at a disadvantage when they aren't able to raise as much locally. So I think that we need to increase funding. As far as the inflation, capturing that in our requirements, I have mixed feelings about it. I think we do each year have to go through the budget, and so it would be challenging to have inflation included in this aspect where it's not in some other areas.
Thank you. Representative Slocum?
Well, this last biennium, we didn't do a great deal of funding. We didn't increase the funding much for education. And when education's funding has to come from referendum, it makes education unequal, and it's supposed to be equal in every district. Every district is supposed to be able, across the state, to be able to offer and do the same things. And when you rely on referendum, every district has different referendum amounts that they've passed, and it really creates an unequal system. So but would I index it to inflation? Probably not, because I don't know how valid that would be. I think we need to make the decision to fund it more, which was my recommendation when I worked with Jennifer Loon, who chaired the Education Finance Committee this last term. I told her put everything on the formula, because every kid in the state wins.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
Yeah, I don't think that I would do the index to inflation. I think there has to be an understanding, though, every time the legislature meets, that education is important, and have that discussion right away, not have it just automatically go up, but have the good conversation to sit down and say we all value education. We need to get things done. We need to fund education and make sure that it goes on the formula, and then it gives local control back to the school boards to use the money where they want. But I think just to have the openness, just to say we value education as a state, and you can tell by the state's budget how much is put towards education, but to have that conversation and to get good conversations going and real conversations to make sure our kids get served.
Thank you. All right, I have some good news. We're going to be only asking 3 more questions. However, your time is going up to 2 minutes for a response. So we're going to begin with Mr. Lehmann.
Okay.
And the question is, family engagement is a critical part of a successful educational experience for students. What do you see as the greatest reason families are not engaging at school? What are some measures the state can take to help draw them in?
I want to ask you to repeat it. I'm just writing.
Okay, that's fine. Your time's ticking, though.
Yep, not a problem. I got 2 minutes now. Family engagement is critical. I think if you look at school district by school district and you look at the demographics within those school districts, that's going to be evident depending on the family makeup. We're blessed in the area I represent, Edina, West Bloomington, to have high family participation. I think as you go across Bloomington, however, that changes with the diversity that's we recognize today. And when you look at the inner city, the same thing comes up. They're more challenged than ever. So those family dynamics definitely have to enter in. How can we measure that or encourage family engagement? Thinking off the cuff, I think we have to make sure, and almost, I hate to say pledge or something, but the parents have to be involved from day one, not just send their kids to school and think, okay, the teachers are going to babysit them for the day, we get them back, I don't value education. No, we have to turn that around, especially with the diversity we have today, to educate the parents or parent in many cases to say, look how valuable this is the future, your children will get good jobs if they get a good education. And so the way that is done is your involvement to make sure they're doing their homework, they're getting to school, and of course, as they come up in the grades, to even have a skin in the game themselves, that they have to want to go to school. If their attitude is, I don't care about school, I don't know if that reflects back to the parents or not, but it isn't healthy for the school environment or the learning environment. So the engagement of the parent is critical, and everything we can do to encourage that engagement, to me, is going to pay dividends in the long run.
Thank you. Senator Wickland.
Yes, I think that family engagement is absolutely essential for their students' success in school. And I think the way that we need to do that, it will differ by district and by school within a district, but I think it does take an investment on the school district's part to understand their families and understand the backgrounds that they come from and what would be the best way to help meet their needs, and that will be different in each community. I think the state provides funding through the Integration Aid Program to support activities that will create greater family engagement. I think that we put a responsibility on the school districts to look at how they use that money in a way to, is it drawing in families to engage in their schools, and I think that that's, we can provide the funding for that, but it's up to school districts to really examine what policies will work for them. As I mentioned earlier, I think other factors need to be considered, such as what are barriers that families face in getting engaged with their student schools. Do they have access through transportation? Do they have transportation access to the school for the types of activities? Do they have the time of day that things are offered? Is it appropriate for the jobs that they hold? I think that you need to look at the cultural backgrounds and how families have traditionally interacted with the schools in their own, in their home countries. So all of those factors need to enter into development of programming, and respectful conversations need to happen with the families to understand better, what do they need from their children's school. I think home visiting programs that begin at birth, I think that could be another way to start the engagement process early.
Thank you. Representative Slocum.
Thank you. I believe that schools need to be comfortable places. For a parent who didn't have a particularly positive school experience, why in the world would you go into school? So it needs to be a welcoming, warm, non-threatening kind of a place. One of the things that I used to do when I had a day where I was pulling my hair out because I didn't get done what I wanted to get done, and the kids were wired up, or we had a choir concert or something, the kind of day that I kind of had today. I used to end the day and make happy calls. I'd take a couple of kids that nobody brags about much, the ones that kind of fade into the woodwork, and I would call home, and I'd talk to a parent, and I'd say, your kid did this today. It was the coolest thing. I just loved it, and I wanted to let you know. And I'm telling you, the parents really liked it because their kid is not noticed a lot, or a bad actor, and it turned things around. When kids perform, science fair, choir concert, band concert, theater, something or t'other, families come. Food is a great motivator. Spaghetti dinner, things like that, parents come. But it's got to be non-threatening. I had parents who came to conferences so drunk they could barely stand up, so stoned that they couldn't focus, but they came to the conference. Who am I to complain? So I did the conference with them. Urged them not to drive home, but, but tried to be as welcoming. Thank you for coming. I know it's been difficult for you. It's got to be a welcoming environment. That's the number one thing.
Thank you. Representative Anderson.
I think the teachers, the PTSA and the teachers have a lot of good ideas, and I think just looking to them to try to figure out ways to get the family more involved. I know now we're getting emails from our teachers every day about how the day was with their younger ones and then in preschool. And now I realize that I'm picturing the teachers after all the kids are gone, writing those emails. But it's really nice to know as a parent what is going on there, and making sure the teachers have time to do that or giving them the resources to do that. I think just interesting ideas we got a call from our teacher today that said our son didn't do his homework from last week, and neither of us even knew he had homework, and he didn't tell us. He gets so excited that he comes home and throws all his stuff out of the book bag. But I think just little ideas of how to get the parents involved with folders or other things like that, and just coming up with collaborative ideas from the teachers, from the parents. There's a lot of knowledge out there. There's a lot of ideas, and I think just valuing that from everybody to come up to figure out the solutions that would help.
Thank you. Senator Franzen?
Thank you. So a lot's been said about family engagement, why it's lacking, and what can the state do to be a better partner, I suppose, with families. Part of it is educating families of the expectation of schools. A lot of our demographics are shifting, and we're experiencing a lot of changes in our demographics from people from all over the world, which we are very welcoming in the state. And we certainly want to be culturally appropriate when it comes to education, but let's not go too far. I know I met a parent who, Ivy League educated, who came to our state who had no idea of our ECFE programs and our screenings. And so we are not doing a good enough job for all of our parents to find a way to engage in a meaningful way. Certainly, when it comes to diversity, we have a ways to go there too, but I think we're working on that. Communication and being culturally sensitive and appropriate for all families, regardless of income. I had a teacher, a friend of mine who teaches, and told me, there's not a lot of difference from parent engagement on a higher pay spectrum to the lowest pay. Both are very busy families with their careers, with more than one job, and time is money, literally, for them. So how can we do a better job to attract all these parents? And I think we need to make it more affordable for families to be able to take the time to read the emails, and to be able to engage in a meaningful way and find appropriate venues for that. One thing that I've worked on the early childhood spectrum of area of issues is parent aware. How do we educate parents of the choices they have for child care and for early childhood programs? And it's taking speed, and I think it's better education for parents to make informed decisions about how to be engaged with their kids' education, which starts so early. So better coordination, better partnership from the state, better communication of our state programs, but at the same time, it's really partnering with the local districts who really know their demographics more than anyone.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with Representative Anderson on this question. How do you define the achievement gap, and how would you like to see it addressed this coming legislative session?
How do I define the achievement gap? There is a terrible achievement gap between white students and students of color, especially in Minneapolis, and that is something that needs to be addressed. There are a lot of early learner programs out there, and maybe it's time to revisit those programs to make sure that they're getting their desired results. But I think, as we've all said, there's a lot of good ideas that have been thrown around, and I think everybody wants what's best for the students and best for the teachers. And we need to have good conversations, not partisan conversations, good conversations that put the students first throughout the state, and come up with those good common sense solutions to eliminate or try to shrink that achievement gap. It's something that is real and something that needs to be dealt with.
Thank you. Representative Slocum?
The achievement gap, I think, is more of an opportunity gap. Was the child read to? The early childhood experiences, just the family dynamics come into play. And if a kid starts school without being read to, without adequate preschool, without the things that parents do to develop language, the child's behind the 8 ball from the beginning. And even if the early childhood stuff kind of levels out after 3rd grade, which it does, that child is still behind, and that behindness stays with them all the way through. I want to see, again, schools that fit the child, not the other way around. So if you have a kid who's hands-on, then they're in classes where they're taking apart a motor, where they're taking apart things and putting things back together again, where they're learning math that way, where they're learning science that way, where the curriculum's adjusted, so not played down, but adjusted, so that the learning goals are met, but they're learning in the method that works for them and addresses their specific learning needs. One of the things I always say is all parents love their kids, and I think that's true. Some parents are just better at it than others. And I have 16 seconds left.
Thank you. Senator Wickland.
Well, first, I think you asked how would we define the achievement gap. I guess I would define it as a problem where we are seeing great disparity between the outcomes for our white students and our students of color, and that is true in Bloomington and Richfield, the communities I represent, as much as it is in other places in the state. And I think recognizing that we need to put as much effort in the suburbs as we do in the urban areas or cities. I think that's one part of solving it, is that we need to address it across our communities. I think to address the issues we're facing, I think to me there are some core areas that we need to go after. Early childhood education, the amount of development that takes place between when a child's born and when they're entering kindergarten is a huge amount of development, brain development, and the more we can provide high-quality environments for children to be in from when they're in infant care, toddler care, through pre-K. I think that is a really important area that we can address that from a state perspective. I think that another area that we have to make sure that we support our teachers and their ability to be strong professionals in their discipline, so that they're able to have the best teaching methodology available and get the professional development and training that they need to be the best teachers they can. And then I think we need to also keep addressing outside factors that I've mentioned before. Housing, stable housing is also a big contributor to stability in school as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lehmann?
Yes, the achievement gap is definitely just a measurement between whether it's diverse students and white students or any school district. And some of the solutions that have been very effective have been the charter schools, which have taken the same diversity that's in the inner city, focused on literacy and math and other disciplines, and been very successful at almost eliminating the achievement gap and or having those students outperform some of the best performing students in the suburbs. So that's critical. The early childhood education, as we talked about earlier, and school readiness also adds to that. The charter schools I mentioned have been important. There are some other things going on in other states that I think we can take advantage of to eliminate or narrow the achievement gap. Parental involvement, we've talked about before, as being so critical. But the thing that really gets me is that we actually eliminated the requirement for a high school diploma on testing and meeting certain literacy and math requirements. And there's a poll out, or not a poll, a ranking by a company called Niche, N-I-C-H-E, and their 2016 Bloomington Best School Rankings put Minnetonka at number 1, Edina number 2, Eden Prairie 3, Wayzata 4, and so on. And when you look at the one ranking in that proficiency for literacy and math, the best schools went from 82% to the low of 71, whereas the Bloomington schools are ranked at 60% in that regard. So I think, and then Minneapolis school goes way down to 42%, so that's just a glaring support for what I mentioned earlier, that we got to get back to proficiency and math requirements before graduation.
Thank you. Senator Francis?
Thank you. I would say for your question on defining the achievement gap, I would define it as our failure to change the status quo. It starts early. We have research that says that to us, that most of our brain development happens before we enter kindergarten, and we're investing more after that phase. So that's why I've been so passionate about the work in early childhood education, where every dollar invested, we reap at the tune of $16 per dollar invested. So it's where it starts, but certainly these gaps that we're seeing is also in the workforce shortage that we also have to address. So it's in the entire spectrum of our workforce. Certainly we'll get a bigger bang for our buck early. So we need to start early. We need a diversity of ideas, including a diversity of teachers all through E through 12 through higher ed, and make it easier to embrace those differences and ideas. Embracing multilingual education. I don't think we've done a good enough job in that in our state, and certainly certain districts have, but we tend to penalize and not essentially give a premium for that asset, which is a second language, a third language, and a lot of our communities have them, and we should be able to include that as a way of assessing our kids as well. I think we need to identify the gap, and we know how to do it. I know Bloomington's doing a great job partnering with the county as well to identify those kids that are failing or are more prone. We're targeting. We're also keeping data along the way of how the progression of the education is going. So how do we do that more effectively across our state? We can learn from things that Bloomington is doing right now, and we can focus it and target it, because we can't do it all, but we certainly are able to identify those families that are and kids that are most at risk.
Great, thank you. Karin had to step out, and my mic isn't live, so I'm going to switch here. I have your last question. We'll start with Representative Slocum, and we'll work to your right, our left, or counterclockwise, and end up with Representative Anderson at the end. So the question is this: what priorities for E12 education would you support in the upcoming legislative session?
Wow. I would support funding education the way it should be funded. I would support expanding support services, in particular mental health. But I don't have to prioritize mental health, counseling, nurse, whatever, because this is a wish list, is what you want. And I would like to see every school be a wraparound school where the whole family is nurtured. The mom and dad, if they need help with job readiness, if they need help with transportation, if they need to figure out how to do nutritious meals, that they get the help, and that the kids are mentored and brought along and followed, and not just for a short period of time. I would love to see that happen with every public school, heck, every school. And I think we have to fund so we're not relying on referendum money, property tax money, because it really makes a difference what community you're in. So again, we're defining education via zip code, and that just doesn't work. That's not fair, and it should be more equitably funded so that we don't have to rely on referendum. If I had a magic wand, there'd be 2 or 3 teachers in every classroom, and the teachers would collaborate, and they would have time to really spend some time with individual kids. And wouldn't that be wonderful? I would love to see this funded. I would love to. And with the wraparound services, identifying kids early and making sure they get the services they need to be well enough to succeed in school. And I used up my time.
Senator Wickland.
Yes, my priorities for next session, if I am reelected, would definitely be to look at, since it is a budget year, to be looking at education. How can we best prioritize funding for education and provide additional funding? As we've talked about, we all hope for adequate funding for our schools. I think today we aren't quite there yet, and we need to provide some additional increases to school districts. One thing we haven't talked about is schools face today a cross-subsidy of many millions of dollars, money that has to go to support our special education programs, but isn't being completely funded by the state or the federal government. So I think there are definitely needs to look at that and to understand better how can we fund our schools more adequately. Other areas that I would be interested in working on would be early childhood and also working to make our child care system work better for families. I am co-chairing a task force on affordable child care, and I hope that we would be able to bring some recommendations forward on ways to improve the child care system in the state, more providers and better reimbursement for providers so that they can make a living doing that as high-quality providers for their children. And so that would be another area that I'd like to work on. And lastly, I'll just mention next year we will be, as a state, turning in a new accountability plan, and I hope that the legislature will have the ability to reflect on recommendations that come forward and work on that to make it a strong plan for our state.
Thank you. Mr. Lehmann?
Well, I'm in alignment with Senator Wickland on two of the points she mentioned. We need to expand the funding for scholarships for early childhood education. That is critical. There is an increasing need for that, and I think, as we've mentioned earlier, and others have pointed out, that it's so important to get to them at an early age and make sure they're school ready. Otherwise, they do not progress all through their educational career. Secondly, the affordable child care, yes, definitely, particularly for those, of course, who have limited incomes. It becomes a burden out of proportion to the rest of us that are maybe blessed out here in the suburbs. And the last thing I had mentioned earlier, I really feel we need to reinstate this literacy and math requirements for a high school diploma before they can get that. As a business owner, or previous business owner now that I'm retired, and in management, we critically need students that can do the basic literacy and math. Otherwise, we're setting them up for failure when they graduate if they can't even master the basics. So that's something I would definitely try to legislate.
Thank you. Senator Franzen?
Thank you, and I would limit my list to three priorities, and one of them is to target at-risk families and kids, which we talked about a little bit already, and some districts like Bloomington's already making headway there. Early childhood education, for what I mentioned earlier, the return on investment for taxpayers, $1 invested reaps as much as $16, so starting early is critical. And last but not least, supporting our teachers. That is our system. Without teachers, we don't have an education system, and we want to attract the best and brightest and support them to stay in the business of teaching, whether it's streamlining the licensing that we talked about, a little bit about issues there, the evaluation process, how can we support teachers being able to get peer-reviewed and get the support they need to be successful, and reduce burdens of administration, which we have heard a lot, especially in the special education field. I have to say, when we talk about cut scores numbers and things that we heard mentioned here tonight. I don't know when the last time I did Algebra 2, but certainly we need to do better for our kids to graduate with the tools they need, and I support that wholeheartedly. So we need to be more innovative, and whether it's looking for statistics, which is a much more reasonable area that we can validate, that would be used even today. As a state legislator, we certainly use more statistics, I would say, than Algebra 2. But our kids are going to be graduating with the resources they need, because we're going to have a cultivation of teachers that are going to teach our kids to be lifelong learners. And I am, with no doubt, wholeheartedly that we're going to be able to achieve that with the support from the state legislature, and at least from my support in the next 4 years. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
First off, I think we look at the funding and see if that is adequate, and see what we, putting it on the formula or doing whatever we need to do. And also, as I walked into the room tonight, I look at the back wall and I look at all the business partnerships that are with the Bloomington schools. And I think that's very valuable, to get the business involved in the community, also to get some education from them. There's a lot of real-world knowledge in the business community, and to get them to be partners with the schools. Getting knowledge to the parents, like we had talked about, how to get involved, resources, making sure they know about the after-school programs or the different programs, so we can serve our kids, and somehow sitting down and getting that discussion going. I know also in Bloomington there's the Career and College Academy, which gets the kids ready their junior year, I think, to partner with businesses to get them some more real-world experience. Last session, I had some Bloomington teachers come into my office, and they sat down and they said, we know that certain members of the school board or part have more of a direct line to you, and we know that we don't. And I looked at them and I said, you are sitting in my office. You have a direct line to me. You can call me whenever you want. You can come up here. You have my cell phone. You have my email. If there's something that I can do to help facilitate a conversation, that's what I want to do. And so that's what excites me about being at the Capitol, is to foster those communications, to break down barriers of, what's going on, why are they doing this, why aren't they doing this, and there's a lot of unanswered questions. So I think just trying to be that facilitator too, as much as possible, to make sure that questions get answered, so that people know what's going on.
Thank you. Well, that completes the question portion of our forum tonight. So we are going to give everybody 2 minutes to do a closing statement. We are going to start with Senator Franzen.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the time. It went by really quickly, and I just want to thank the constituents that reside, or have kids in the Bloomington School District for giving me the opportunity to represent your voice at the Capitol for the last 4 years. I've certainly taken it to heart and have focused my efforts on a few areas which you have already heard, in early childhood education being one of them, but I've also served in higher ed, so I also see how we're preparing our kids for those higher education world and the workforce. And as a small business owner and a former corporate attorney in a large corporation, I see it from all sides, from what we need to do to fill our gap in the workforce, and also what we need to do to teach the leaders of the future. And I take it to heart, and certainly had been honored to represent you in the legislature, and want to continue to do so in the capacity as your state senator, if you give me 4 more years, to continue to bring that voice, to continue to challenge the status quo, and to be able to make a meaningful reform, not just things that are Band-Aid approaches. I really do believe that we owe our state a good service to represent you, and to leave it better than we got there, like a Girl Scout as I am. Leave a better place than what we found it. And our state is in good hands, and we've done a lot of progress, but we certainly have a lot more to do with the gaps in our education system all through the workforce, and also to be able to really make a bigger impact in that early childhood education, which I know will make a big difference long term. Sometimes these investments take a while, and that's why I believe in reaping and sowing the plants that we seed and that we cultivate. So again, thank you for doing this and for having this forum, and it has been a pleasure to represent you, and I look forward to hopefully continuing that representation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lehmann.
I'll start where Senator Franson left off. Thank you again to the PTSA Council, to Karen, Tiffany, and Suzanne for the timing. I know these things take a lot of effort. Well, I don't think anyone can watch this tonight or be part of this and not feel that there's a lot of passion and value in education from each person up here. I mean, that's second to none. I think everyone here realizes how important it is to the future of not only Bloomington, Edina, but the entire Twin City area, the state, and on to the country. Education is, again, critical to the backbone of not only a successful society, but it goes on to the business, which is also so critically important. We talked about funding a little bit. No specific question was asked regarding that. We currently fund, about $6,100 per pupil, but that's bumped up with the special education needs to almost $11,500. This is on average across the state. Why do I mention that? Because the federal government put in the special education laws way back in about 1975, and they committed to fund 40% of our special education needs. That is now dwindled to 10% of our education needs. So that has meant the district and the local areas have to come up with the additional funding. Even the state is part of that. So I encourage our federal elected officials and would lobby hard for that to obtain additional funding and go back to the original promise the federal government made. I know that's a pipe dream, but try to go after it if we could. Secondly, I think we have to allow a lot of local control from all the stakeholders. And what I mean by those are the teachers, the parents, the business leaders, and particularly the school board. And in my last few seconds here, we need to put the needs of the students first. Improve school performance, have great teachers, stable, reliable funding, which is critical, and community and parental involvement, which we've mentioned before. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Wickland.
Thank you, and thank you again to the PTSA for the time and effort in organizing this tonight. It was great to have the opportunity to talk about quite a variety of issues relating to education, and I agree that all of us around the table have a lot of interest in seeing our students well served in Minnesota. I have really been honored to be able to represent Bloomington and Richfield at the Capitol, and I hope that I will be able to earn your support again this year. I have been passionate about working on educational issues because I know they're so important to constituents in the community. As I'm going door to door, I talk to people about what they care about, and it's sometimes it's a young family who they care about their kids having a well-rounded education. Other times it's people who are on the other side of their getting to retirement, and we need to have a good workforce that will be able to support our retirees and our seniors in our community, allowing them to have a good retirement. So I think that education is something that I would continue to prioritize if I'm able to continue working, and I think there's a lot of work that we need to do to make sure that all our students have access to a great education and educational opportunities. So thank you again.
Thank you. Representative Slocum.
Thank you, and thank you, all three of you. Even Suzanne, who would hold up that sign and make me crazy. It's a hard job. I visited Kennedy High School a few times, and I hope that people have gotten from my remarks that I don't really like factory model schools, that I like learning, that kids learn in different ways, and I want kids' learning styles addressed in schools. So I do support public school choice and more programs for kids. I was at Kennedy a few years back, and I've been there since, but they introduced me to this hands-on program where the kids were building a house. And that was their math class. They were learning to measure, they were learning metric versus, and it was phenomenal. It was so wonderful. I got very excited. Then I happened to be moseying through the state fair, and lo and behold, there's Bloomington. They won some kind of thing at the fair about a motorcycle that the kids had built. It was amazing. And the kids were there, and they were so engaged and so excited, and it was so gratifying and wonderful to see. I've done things as vice chair and just as a member of K-12 Ed Finance. This is my area. I did the Charter School Reform Bill, which has been rated #1 in the nation, not just Minnesota. It's a great big bill, and it really streamlined charters and made them more accountable. Whether you love them or hate them, it was a good bill. I also got grants for recovery schools, which are sober schools for kids who use drugs. I need 30 more seconds. And we used to have 12 of them in the state. Now we only have 4. And I want to see that expanded. PSEO, College in the Schools, is what I'm working on right now to hopefully get reelected to go into session.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
Education is a constitutional obligation through the state, so it's very important that we get this right. It means creating an education formula that treats all kids the same, regardless of where they live, and it means giving them the funding to make sure they can do a good job, but I believe that everybody here, shares that same goal. At the same time, the world around us is rapidly changing, and so our kids and the education needs, so we need to make sure that we are constantly evolving with those and having the conversations to figure out what's best for the kids. We need to have more discussions about ways to keep those best teachers in the classroom, and maybe that's finding mid-career professionals with that STEM experience to come in and help teach. Also, putting the teachers more in charge. The teachers are there every day. They know more probably about my kids' learning style than I do. And so just putting them in charge, giving them the authority to come up with creative ways to get input from them, I think is very important. As we can tell from everybody that was here, though, education is very important, and really excited just to have that basic building foundation that we need to sit down and have the good conversations. And I keep saying good conversations because that's what needs to happen. Sometimes the good conversations don't happen. I feel like people are standing in the corners of the rooms and they never come to the middle of the table and just say what's best for the kids, what do we do, without any preconceived notions. So we need to keep doing that at the Capitol to make sure that education is done right, to make sure the kids are put first and make sure they get their education, because education is very important.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our forum for this evening. We'd like to thank you all for coming out and talking about education with us tonight. Also like to thank the audience members that are here and also at home. BEC TV has been recording this live this evening. It will be replayed on Channel 15 as well as on bectv.org right up until the election. And if you want to know how to see the replay or find out about streaming instructions, you can just go on bectv.org, and they should have the schedule up fairly soon. Speaking of BEC TV, we need to thank Tom Ringdahl, and this is a big one, Cody Provoznik, for helping us out tonight. They make this whole thing run, and it's always great. I would also like to thank Suzanne for being the sign holder and keeping the time this evening. I'd also like to thank the PTSA volunteers who even if the ones that aren't here, they help get the message out to everybody. We also had some volunteers here tonight, and Tiffany, who's the president of the organization, and I would be remiss if I know she's hiding somewhere, but Heather Starks, who put this forum together this evening, she contacted all the candidates and set up everything, and it wouldn't have run as smoothly without her. So, and just one other thing, the Bloomington League of Women Voters is hosting an event Tuesday, October 4th, which is tomorrow if you're live today, at 7 p.m. at the Bloomington Civic Plaza Council Chambers. And I guess the last thing I would just like to say is please make sure to vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you.